Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Dr. Michael, Dr. Barry on the line.
Barry,
Happy to see you.
How are you this evening?
I'm doing well. We were talking about stand-up comedians, and so I think that's a natural before we hit the magic record button. And so I think that's a natural segue to a discussion of Kyle Chayka and two essays. First off, let's introduce what we think is going to be a three-parter, roughly speaking, on the taste economy.
Okay.
Or at least another episode. But I think it maybe a three-parter.
So I think it's safe to say we'll linger here for a little bit.
We're going to linger here. That's much safer, isn't it?
Right.
Let's do that.
So
we're going to linger on this notion of the taste economy, and our way into this particular subject are two essays by Kyle Chayka,
friend of the show.
Listeners, watchers, whatever, followers, that's the word, who followers of our podcasts, our modest podcasts, will remember perhaps from the Byung-Chul Han episode about a year or so ago. And Chayka talks a lot about online culture, and culture is the operative word. And art and culture is the operative word for this particular mini segment on the Critical Media Studies podcast. In particular, we're going to be talking about two essays, fairly recent, 2024 essays, by Kyle Chayka. One of them is called The New Generation of Online Culture Curators. That was originally published in The New Yorker.
Right.
And the essay that I'm going to start our discussion off, I'm going to kick off with an essay from my bedside reading. I know it's yours, Michael, because I know that, like me, you're reading every issue of Behavioral Scientist.
I wouldn't miss one.
Wouldn't miss it, right? And so, or at least the culture technology session, Behavioral Scientists. And we're going to talk about another 2024 essay by Chayka called How to Cultivate Taste. That's the operative word, obviously, for the pod, this episode. How to Cultivate Taste in the Age of Algorithms.
Before we get going, I do want to say a couple things,
please.
I think that it's important that we note that taste is obviously an important aspect of this. Culture, aesthetics, right? We're playing in that part of the sandbox tonight. But I also don't want to sell short the online aspect of these discussions, because
online culture curators is very crucial.
Because and it's not so much that it's happening online that's particularly revelatory here. It's more that Chayka, and I think some of the other people that we're going to discuss as we dig into this, is really talking about art and culture and aesthetics through a new online lens. He's talking, and this is part of the reason that's got me so jazzed about this, is that we're now talking about the internet as a different sort of thing. Chayka is very much looking at this as part of the shift. I think he's looking at these questions and issues around aesthetics as part of Web 3.0, as a part of Web 2.0, which is going to really force us to reconsider the role of algorithms and choice, and I think questions really of agency when we get into this a bit. So I don't want to short sell the fact that this is a new version. No, that's not safe to say. We're looking at the internet differently than we have explicitly in the past. So I think that there's a lot to unpack, and I think in that spirit, it's probably best to advertise tonight's discussion as kind of an overview or a gloss so that we can get in. I think if we're not
getting like Edie Brickell, we're not going to get too deep.
That was good. That
Thank you. Well,
God bless you. That makes me so happy.
we're not getting too deep. We're going to, this is basically an overview of the particular problem of the taste economy and the ways in which it's sort of resonating in the very particular modern, contemporary is the word, contemporary version of the internet, which
Yeah,
is what
yeah.
you're referring to.
But I think it's important to note that the contemporary version of the internet, as you put it,
Mhm.
functions differently than the internet that we've been speaking of to this point.
In critical, and by we you mean critical on this podcast
Yeah, the
in
two of
critical
us
media studies.
on
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
podcast.
Mhm.
Not that what we're talking about isn't still in play, but Chayka has identified an evolution that alters the way that we do and grow aesthetics and culture. And so I think
Well,
that's worth that. I think that's an important starting point.
well, I agree with that. I agree with you on that. And maybe before, at the risk of not leaving the door, which is what we always do, not finishing a thought, especially I'm mea culpa.
If that, by the
Um,
way, if that reference doesn't make any sense, Barry and I have a longstanding joke that we could basically stand in the doorway and discuss whatever, but it takes us a long time to actually get
things is-
into the room and have the conversation. So
but if
yes,
we could just do a podcast on the doorway discussion, we'd be up there with Joe Rogan, but we're not there yet.
I don't want to be up
Anyway,
there with Joe Rogan.
but well, yeah, but well, my point was this though. Before I was about to launch into, I was about to introduce some of Chayka's specific
Hmm.
terms that he uses that are very obviously that are operating in the Chayka universe for his particular discussion of the taste economy and of culture in this contemporary, you know, version of the internet. But you make me think that Michael, your comments make me think that we do need to linger before we get into Chayka, and maybe just briefly, but we'll try and make it brief and compact. Maybe let's talk about the difference between quickly, and we'll try and make it quick. The differences between Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Let's
Okay.
see if we can do that. So Web 1.0, I'll take a stab. That's basically the Wild West, so to speak, days of the internet, when the internet was basically about finding a search engine. It's pre social media. It's even pre blogs, right? It's the hype. It's
So it's
the age of hypertext and hyperlinks, right?
yeah, it's I think it's commonly referred to as the static web.
The static
And
web. Thank you.
the broadly speaking, I think the definition is it is not interactive. It is read-only content, text-based.
Read only content,
And I think
text based, right? That's it.
one of the things that differentiates the static web from Web 2.0 is
Okay.
that it is not nearly as democratic as
Well, not interactive in that
well, yeah,
because it's not interactive, right?
publishing was limited.
Oh, right. Oh, I see
Who
what you mean.
so
Right.
it was basically I think you could probably say it read like a giant Wikipedia page,
Sure.
right?
Sure. So
Uh,
Wikipedia no, that's wonderful. You're doing so well with these references because that's a perfect example or exemplar of Web 1.0, right?
yeah, and
The
that's
kind of static face, the static text of a Wikipedia entry.
yeah, and that's roughly mid 90s to early 2000s.
Sure. So, and Web 2.0, as I understand it, that's where the web gets more interactive. It is the web of social media, or is it, would we say that Web 3.0 is our social media,
I think
our
that
current world?
the difference, I think they're both social, but the difference between 2.0 and what we'll call 3.0,
Okay.
2.0 is very centralized. So it is social, but it is social around platforms like
Specific platforms,
so
right?
think MySpace first,
Sure. And then
then
Facebook,
Facebook, right?
and
So it is interactive, but one of the big differences between 2.0 and 3.0, and I don't think this
mhm,
is necessarily where we're going to go now, but it's probably worth mentioning, right?
mhm.
Is that in Web 2.0, because of the way that it's constructed, that socializing makes you, the user, the product for these massive corporations. So Facebook and Google and everybody else, right? Via cookies that you leave. And one of the big markers of 3.0 is blockchain, where you have this
Right. Right.
decentralized architecture to everything. So in 2.0, it is interactive. It is certainly social. Um, but
But it's also the algorithm, right? It's also the algorithm.
very much, because again, those are, so I think the thing, and this is what really I think is so exciting to talk about with this episode, what we're going to talk about today, is that the algorithm works in a way because of how centralized everything is. So I
Right.
think the easiest example, and Chayka talks about this, is like the Amazon algorithm.
Sure.
Right? You can shop for a million different things. It's all done through Amazon, and
Right.
you are tracked everywhere you go, everything you do. So I said earlier, you become the product, right? Like your movements are tracked, your the amount of attention that you give to various things is factored into how the internet
Mhm.
works for you, right? Like
Mhm.
your Google is different than my Google because we
Indeed.
are tracked, and it
Right.
gives us what we want. So it's social, but we are sort of a product in that
Right.
environment.
So the socialization into the consumer, the way
Yes.
the socializing process is really geared toward consumption. That's what we're talking about with Web 2.0. And this also is the world of that Varoufakis and Stiegler,
Are
in their very
very,
different
very unhappy
ways,
with. Yeah.
are unhappy with, but also the main thing they're describing, right? That's the internet
Right,
that
right,
they're
right.
that's central to their descriptions and accounts of the internet. And Web 3.0 is this current configure. Let's just say a word about that, because we'll be saying more words about that. But how did you describe it? You described it as more decentralized.
So yeah, it is compared to Web 2.0. It
Mm-hmm.
is decentralized. You don't nothing in 2.0, everything routes through a few main hubs to get your
Hubs and
information,
platforms, right? Right.
right? So 3.0, I think it's often called the semantic web, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the hallmarks of this are AI, right? Our ability to communicate in much more finely nuanced ways with the machine
Sure.
directly. And so in a
Sure.
way, and I don't think I understand it well enough to be able to state any of what follows as fact, but my understanding is that in doing this, we sort of we it seems to me that we're kind of working around the larger algorithms that are a hallmark of this central hub
Got
architecture.
it. Got it.
Um,
Got it. Oh, that's a
but
great play. Okay.
so
Yo,
so
go
the, so
ahead.
the difference so the difference here, I think one of the significant differences that's going to get us into
Mm-hmm.
Chayka here
Mm-hmm.
is that it is much more individualized, much more personalized, but not necessarily via cookies, for example.
Thank
It's
you.
it's it's more a case of we can go to what we want much more efficiently and directly because we're able to communicate more effectively and specifically with the machine.
Such great points, especially that last one, and key to understanding Chayka, especially that last point.
By the
That
way,
this is a way. Okay, go
if
ahead.
I got that wrong, and I'm sure I got parts of it wrong, this would be one of those things I would
We
absolutely
would
love
love
to
to be
hear
corrected.
the correct
Yes,
version of
yes,
this.
yeah, yeah. But your last statement about the possibility of a personalization happening online, that outside of the cookie, outside
Yeah.
of cookie preferences, it's that possibility that Chayka wants to pursue and further, and you know that possibility of a personalized online profile, or online ensemble of and personalized ensemble of online practices that are not wholly governed by cookies the algorithm and the workings and promptings that are issuing from a centralized platform or hub. That's what Chayka wants to explore. And so what he's okay, now I think we can translate, we can move into his specific language. And I think that you well expressed in your last bit of discourse, Michael. I think you well express the aims of Chayka's Kyle Chayka's aims. But now we kind of have to step back. Stepping into Chayka means we have to take account of his particular vocabulary. And it's interesting that his vocabulary is no longer the online vocabulary, that his models for this personalized process don't come from online behavior. They come from older days of media interaction represented by the DJ or represented by face-to-face encounters or between knowing individuals or would-be curators within
Connoisseurs.
Connoisseurs. And so he uses metaphors from an older media landscape. The connoisseur, which I'm going to read about directly. Also, the museum curator. I mentioned the DJ, but also the museum, the curator, dating back to the 19th century. And the museum, the curator, and archivist in a way, maybe even the archivist. These older modes of interacting with media. He is kind of thinking about planting them or establishing them within the landscape of Web 3.0. And so to give you a sense of his discourse, so there's a little bit of a what I'm trying to make the point that while you are certainly correct to mention this is an online thing, this is about online culture curators. Chayka also believes that it's possible to rehabilitate these residual poses and somehow resituate them or reformulate them in the contemporary web landscape. So there's an interesting kind of maybe tension in his vocabulary. So this passage, I think we see a real tension in this passage from the essay on how to cultivate taste in the age of algorithms. I think you see a little, some retro leanings and yearnings here, and a self-consciously archaic vocabulary. Having to consciously accrue a collection. I'm reading from Chayka now. Having to consciously accrue a collection and think through what you enjoy most about a particular creator or body of culture. Now, just to interrupt myself on this, particular creator, that's a very contemporary locution. That sounds like a content creator. But what he also means is artist, right? Having to think through what you enjoy most about an artist, returning to his locutions, a particular creator or body of culture, means becoming a connoisseur, the archaic word. The term has a pretentious quality. I'll interrupt myself and Chayka again. Pretentious quality partially because we're in an automated age, online age, where we don't talk about curators anymore or connoisseurs anymore. That seems so Victorian and so retro. But he feels, no, we can somehow, the promise of the taste economy, the promise of Chayka's venture is that we can somehow bring back or recapture some of that thoughtful quality in contemporary online culture. So back to Chayka. The term has a pretentious quality, but we can become connoisseurs of anything. Reality TV shows, noise music, apple pie recipes. What we gain with algorithmic feeds in terms of availability, we lose in connoisseurship, which requires depth and intention and slowness. Connoisseurship is ultimately a form of deep appreciation for what the artist has done as well as the capacities of our own taste. Well, I'm going to stop there and allow Michael, give Michael a chance to comment. But I guess one thing I'll make a note here that one thing we want to discuss further is how does Chayka think we can recapture this older mode of appreciation and, implant it in, our online cultural activity. But
Yeah, I think that the key, as I was reading this, the thing
mhm,
that there were a couple things that kept jumping out at me. Um, because so I was thinking, it's so hard in a way to step outside of the world we live in because it has become all encompassing. It is a ubiquitous situation. Everywhere you go, this is how business is done. This is how, and I don't mean
mhm,
business as in like commerce. I mean like this is how life is lived. And so for me, the sort of intellectual analog for this
mhm,
was high school and music and sharing tapes
mhm,
and discovering new bands to listen to. And the thing that he talks about here, there's a couple things, but the thing that really jumped out at me was that it has to be slow. It has to be deliberate. And one thing that um, you know, Jonathan Crary calls 24/7 culture, right? One of the hallmarks of this is that it is instant and it is unyielding, right? It is always on, always going, and it is always fast, and it is getting faster. And that if we are to cultivate an aesthetic, if we are to, really learn something in this way. And this is Stiegler as well. This is everybody we've talked about has sort of been looking towards this
yeah,
moment. And it's now as if the internet, as Chayka is looking at, and what 3.0, the promise of 3.0, which is kind of frighteningly optimistic. And I don't know that I share that optimism necessarily, but one of the hallmarks is that it has to be slow.
mhm,
And one of the things that the algorithm, and this may be jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things that
mhm,
the algorithm provides us
mhm,
that I think Chayka would absolutely balk at, and rightfully so, is that the algorithm provides a friction-free experience,
mhm.
right? You've done these, you'll like
Absolutely
this. You've
right,
done
right.
this,
And
you'll like this. This is the next step for you.
mhm,
And that removes, I mean, by definition, that is rapid, right? You are going to be fast. But when you go slowly, you are forced to actually immerse yourself and attach yourself to what it is. And there's no guarantee that that attachment is going to be good. And I think that what happens is that in working through these not good things, we cultivate our sense of what it is that we want and what we're looking for.
right,
And
right.
when we come to those things, there's two real differences that the algorithm can't provide. One is that we have an actual experience of coming to this thing, of arriving at this thing, which personalizes it very differently for us, I think. And the second, and you haven't talked about this yet, but I think it's a natural next step, is, these sort of the question of how we get to our aesthetics, what it is that we, what is the, if not the algorithm, then what is the mechanism by which we're able to arrive at these discoveries, right? And for him, these are sort of curators, right? These are all of the little, and it's a word that really frightened me at first because it has such a different connotation as we tend to think of it, but the influencer, right?
Right.
And historically, I've always thought of the online influencer as a shill for a product. You are essentially just the new version of the commercial actor. But he's talking about it differently. These are cultural influencers. These are people who have channels devoted to wristwatches that have followers in the, who knows, maybe in the millions, but most likely in the thousands. They're much smaller niche corners of the internet where people who care deeply and who know
Hmm.
quite a bit
And who know
interact,
quite a bit and are
right?
connoisseurs, to
And so,
use the
yes,
other term, right?
and so what happens is, uh, we find, this is Chayka, not me, we form this attachment to these people, these influencers. And so now, by virtue of the fact that it's slow, I come to this more on my own terms than having it algorithmically thrown at me.
Mhm.
And I come to it with a sense of trust that the person in whom I have invested my energies and who has shown me things I might not like, who has broken,
Right.
the efficiency, who does not operate according to the rigid efficiency of these algorithms. Um, there's a trust, so there's a personal investment in a trust, and there's also a chance to actually cultivate an aesthetic that yields a deeper meaning. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at here is like, the reintroduction of friction, the reintroduction of slow as a means of actually creating meaning as opposed to just, instantly disposable what?
Well, let
Flotsam
me
and
break.
jetsam.
Let me. I don't want to interrupt your thought,
No.
but but something you just said, I did have questions for you. I had
Okay.
follow-up questions for you. Well, first a comment and then a follow-up question. A comment. As you were talking, and as you emphasized, because you emphasized the crucial element of slowness, of slowing things down, of trial and error in this process of acquiring taste, which means that you can be deluded and wrong
Hmm.
in your
Hmm.
choices. And that doesn't become something to merely discard, but something to work with in order to reach your next step of evolution, the further evolution of your taste. Um, in talking in rightly underscoring the importance of slow appreciation of that and emphasizing that slow appreciation equals, in Chayka's terms, depth appreciation.
Right.
Uh, you remind me, or you demonstrate to me, that Chayka is a darn good reader of Byung-Chul Han. In that there is that one particular essay, and I think we talked about it, from the Burnout Society, that's at the very beginning of his collection. And it's an essay called Profound Boredom.
Hmm.
And when you come across it barely mentions the internet, but it's very clear that Byung-Chul Han has the early stirrings of internet culture in his mind when he talks about this, because you encounter the brief essay and you go into it and you're thinking profound boredom. Nobody is going to write an essay on in favor of profound boredom, but of course he is.
Hmm.
And what's important about boredom is that boredom is the dead time that is not dead time, because it is the time of failure that allows things to grow and germinate. It's the Stiglerian moment. You also
Right.
identified this as the Stiglerian moment of noesis.
Correct.
But to me, it seems that when you talk about slow, and when Chayka talks about slow appreciation, he has the Byung-Chul Han Stiglerian notion of slow evolutions equaling deep evolutions. That's Byung-Chul Han's really the master point of the profound boredom essay. That profound boredom is not to be avoided because it's the necessary sediment for the aesthetic and for culture.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I think that historically, if you think about Stiegler, right, that boredom, that noesis is time to think. It's time to step
Absolutely. Right.
away.
Right.
And for Han, I think it's a very similar thing, right? That this boredom, this time away is where an aesthetic can actually
Right.
take root and solidify, because you have the opportunity. And this is something, there was a term that Chayka used about, I have it here actually. He says these tastemakers all provide an interface between the creators of culture and its consumers. They constantly gather and judge new material to determine how and why it may
That's it.
resonate with audiences. This aspect of judging, right? An
Absolutely.
algorithm cannot judge, and in an algorithmic
Absolutely.
environment, we don't have the opportunity to judge. Whereas in this boredom or this state of noesis, there is that space where judgment can kind of form. You can form a judgment, and that's where I feel we get an aesthetic or a culture.
You have perfectly now it's perfect for me to this is a perfect time for me to ask you my concluding question, actually.
Oh boy.
Because I think you're talking a good game and Chayka is talking a good game about slowness. But my concluding question for you, this is a question I said I had for you. Uh, well, how do you slow down on the internet?
Well, so I think
How do you get
in
bored?
okay,
Or don't answer that question. Now, I think let me return to the first. I think the first way I said it is the better formulation. What's at stake is slowing down. That's what Chayka, empowered by Stiegler and Byung-Chul Han. That's what's at stake here, right? For
right.
Chayka. So my question for you and for me and for Chayka is how do you slow down?
Okay, so
How do you turn an influencer into a curator?
I think this is interesting. And I would say that in a Web 2.0 construction or Web 2.0 or organization, it's very difficult because the entire organization of the internet and of information is designed to move forward in any direction. And those directions are all determined by your previous clicks and visits. The exception to that I would use in a Web 2.0 situation,
Yes. Yes.
and I talk with my students about this a lot, is the Wikipedia wormhole. Okay. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you read a Wikipedia article
Oh,
and you're
I
reading about,
certainly I live it, man.
right. So you start out reading about
Yeah.
icebergs
And
and
then all
you
of a
start
sudden it's
clicking,
10
and
hours
then
later. Yeah.
3 hours later you're reading
Yeah.
about Beatles.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Not the band, but the
Right.
bug,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so that is a space for boredom, but it's also kind of a unique space and kind of a nerdy space, right? Because you're not being advertised to. You're sort of, it's like sitting in a library for a way. I mean, what did we say when we were talking about the internet, right? The static web looked like a Wikipedia page.
Right. It
Okay.
looked like an
So
encyclopedia.
right. So I think there's your space for boredom in Web 2.0. But the minute you get out of that, the minute you start having moving pictures and stuff, you're sucked in and you're whisked away to places.
Hmm.
The difference is, I think that in the Wiki, and I'll move it along quickly here, but I think that in the Wikipedia example that I just came up with, I feel like the difference there is you get to make the choice, and your speed is determined by how well you read and what's interesting to you, right? So you're not you are you're in that situation. I feel like you're kind of in your mind and you get to make choices about what comes next because you don't have
Hmm.
anything
Hmm.
popping up. So that's great, but that's not where the web is going, right? So I think, how do you
Hmm.
get bored? The interesting distinction between 2.0 and 3.0 for me is the rise of artificial intelligence and is the ability to communicate more specifically. You're still doing it with an algorithm, right? I mean, this is just a giant language model,
Right.
but it's a more refined model that is able to process nuance more effectively. And
Where,
so,
but how's it do? Where's the nuance getting into the net? How's the nuance and how's the slowness getting in the network?
I don't know that slowness is necessarily a thing,
Okay. Okay. The nuance.
but I feel that it seems to me
Hmm.
that it is easier now than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Sure.
to
Okay.
find something specific with less noise.
Hmm. But wouldn't
And
that speed things up?
well, no, because the less noise,
Oh, 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 I
yes, it
see. I
speeds
see.
things up in the sense that I'm able to go more quickly from
Sure,
where I
toward it.
am to what I want.
Right,
And I
right.
am now, I'm not saying that this is a noiseless environment, God knows. And
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
not saying
Yeah.
that this is the library where I can sit and ponder and look out a window and just daydream and fantasize. But I think that we're more able to find what it is that we're looking for. And I think that it sounds paradoxical in a way, but as more people, I talked earlier about, like, again, the static web, the ability to publish and the ability to actually have a space for what I want to put on the web was limited. Now, anybody with a phone can have a YouTube channel. And that's both obnoxious in the sense that everybody's got a voice for every single thing. So it's a very loud and cluttered place. But our ability to find the things that we're looking for, I think, opens up the potential to connect with the connoisseur, with the aficionado, with the people who know. And we're limited in the sense that we have to go find it. It's no longer dropped in our laps.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I feel like the ability to say, look, I'd like to know more about X,
Hmm.
and be able to ask a machine that in my language and have it give me something that is more in line with that language than just a general blob. Here's what you've already done. I think we can be more specific about where we think we want to go. I don't know. What do you think?
Um,
It doesn't get us out. I guess, before I ask you a question, but it doesn't
sure.
get us out of the algorithm, but I think it opens up certain avenues that the algorithm might have missed because we can ask more specifically. And now that we can ask more specifically, you don't have perfect example, perhaps. If you search for something and you're not on Google's top two pages of returns, you're never getting seen because nobody clicks to that third page of searches when they go through Google. So if
Right.
Google doesn't understand you directly, if it misinterprets what you're saying, you're stuck with this. But if Google understands exactly what I'm saying, then maybe I get a more refined algorithm that might
And then
find me
you get to your
things.
message. Then you get connected to your message. But I keep on coming back to the fact I, I'm not seeing the friction here. In fact, what you seem to be describing is a process where the friction, because there are new possibilities that
No, I
make the
think
process
no.
less frictionless.
Well, no,
More frictionless?
I,
Is that
I
the word?
think, well, I think from one perspective, yes, but on the other hand,
Uh-huh.
how many clowns have a podcast? You can
A
ask for
lot.
a podcast on media
A
studies,
lot.
and
Yes, exactly.
you're gonna get, two guys who just love to linger in the doorway, right? There's a lot of, but the difference is you now have to, the friction is not so much a case of the algorithm gave me the wrong thing.
Oh, I see.
Now
I see.
it's
I
the
see.
algorithm gave me what I asked for. I can ask much more specifically. I'm not cutting with a chainsaw. I'm able to cut with a much more with a much finer blade. This is what I want. Now I get a more focused 40 responses. It's up to me to determine which of these 40 has the sort of credibility that
Mhm.
I'm willing to invest in.
And so the onus is back on you more than on the curator.
Well, the onus is on me to judge who is.
Ah, okay. So the judgment. I
That's
got
it,
it.
and it comes
I
back to
got it.
judgment, I think.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good place to stop this episode because we're
Well,
going to return to these issues in episode 2.
we'll stop here and we'll use this as our jumping off point for our discussions of aesthetics and culture and
And the
3.0.
taste
Very,
economy, more specifically, of the taste
yes,
economy. So we'll revisit this in our next episode.
absolutely. Barry, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
A lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast.
To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.